I'm taking a little time today to research a few new bee yard leads I got. I'm always looking for better yards. I have a few yards that have to be moved soon, having problems, issues in those spots. One of them is one of my very first bee yards. I've had it for, gosh, close to 30 years, but suddenly it's gone kind of sour. There's a vineyard real close, and the new owners are just spraying the heck out of the grapes. And it's not that the bees are visiting the grapes, it's that the bees are visiting the clover that's underneath the grapes. And I talked to the vineyard manager, and he's a nice guy, but he has no interest in spraying at night or anything else. So it's really up to us to move our bees if we're going to survive. I've had the same experience in apple orchards too. Long after the apple trees were done blooming, I was getting hit with pesticide because the bees were working the clover and the grass under the apple trees when they were spraying them later on. And it's not just pesticides, fungicides are an issue too. A lot of people don't realize that fungicides are really just another form of pesticide actually. And plus, if fungicides get in your comb, they can interact synergistically with other chemicals that the bees may be bringing in later on. So it's really just best to get away from that stuff. I've got a few yards that are in areas that are somewhat agricultural. It's kind of a crapshoot really whether they do okay or not. Most years I get by. Farmers pretty conscientious in that area. Occasionally I get hit. So, you know, up here in the mountains you think you'd be pretty safe, but it just takes one farmer half-mile down the road that's raising some sweet corn or something like that to give you trouble. So anyway, the bottom line is we're always looking for more and better yards. This is a really good yard. I'll take the camera around and show some of the reasons. It's tricky to get a good location, especially in our area because it's so hilly and mountainous, and there's ravines and creeks and branches and hills and woods everywhere. And quite often we have to actually carve a spot out of the woods or something. It's, you know, in the plain states and California, some of these states, it's just simply a matter of finding a place that's above the floodplain and setting your colonies down. It's not like that here at all. Sometimes we'll work pretty hard to get a yard in shape to use, and it's just what we have to do here. I took a video of a yard we built last week, and I'll probably add it on to this and show what we have to go through sometimes. Step over the bare fence here. This yard does have a couple drawbacks. One is we had to carve this driveway out to get in here. It wasn't too bad. It took us about a half a day. It's on a hillside, which has its pros and cons. We have to kind of work on our bee stands to get them level to the point where the bees are just right. We like the entrances on our colonies to be heading sort of downhill, so when rainwater hits the landing board it runs out instead of in. A lot of times we'll shim up a bee stand with a 1x4 in the back or the front just to get it right. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of making sure the water runs out. This yard, let's see, this direction is south, so it's got really, really good full sun. And that's pretty important. In all of our yards, we really like to see at least a half a day of full sun. Obviously, a full day is best, but sometimes you have to take what you can get. This yard for years was down here in this bottom, and the bees did fair down there, but there's a little creek over there, and quite often in the winter it would just stay moist down there. It wouldn't ever dry out. Up here on this hillside, I think the elevation's probably about 30 foot higher, and the bees just do a lot better. Down there in that bottom, we had a condensation problem inside the colonies because it was just moist air, and just bringing it up just this little bit onto this hillside cured that. Our condensation issue just went away. Now, I'm not saying that these bees don't have any condensation in them. I'm just saying that it's pretty minimal. It's not a problem. Looks like they're bringing in a bunch of goldenrod pollen. That's nice to see. It's, what is the date today? It's September 20th today. So we have this goldenrod going on. Anyway, this full southern exposure is really nice, but what's just as important for us in this area is behind the yard, and that is this north wind break. Whenever we get cold winter winds, they always come from the north by northwest, kind of an Arctic blast, and it does come all the way down into Georgia, and it can be really miserable. We have that windbreak behind the yard right there. It makes a huge difference. And of course you can see all the colonies not only are facing downhill, but they're also generally facing south. I sometimes get asked, does it matter what direction they're facing? And it's not super important. It is best if they face south or southeast because the morning sun goes in the entrance earlier. But you know, on these four-way pallets we have, there's no way of having all the colonies facing in the perfect direction. And we see that the ones that are facing north or west or other directions do fine too, but the ones that are facing due south or southeast, they tend to be just a little better. So is it enough difference to worry about it? If it's easy to accomplish, I'd say yes. If it's difficult, I'd say don't worry about it. We have a lot of bees facing north and they do just fine too. Something else that I've always known is that bees do better on these individual bottom board stands than they do on pallets. When you have supersedure and swarm cells trying to mate and things like that, you get a much better success rate when the bees are on these individual stands than you do on pallets. It's kind of tricky finding new bee yards in the beginning. I remember in the old days I'd literally knock on doors. If I saw a place I liked, I'd just go up to the door and, you know, kind of give them my line. Hi, I'm a beekeeper and I'm looking for new spots to put bees and wondered if you're open to the idea of having bees on your property. Sometimes people would say, oh sure, yeah, we love bees, and sometimes they say no, and occasionally I'd get a hell no. And I get that. I mean, some people just don't want bees around at all, and you know, I don't have any judgment there. Not everybody loves bees. I know people that are looking for new yards to begin with are curious about just what they should pay for a yard. I've always kept it real simple. I just give the landowners a case of honey, and if they're nice folks, sometimes I'll give them two if they need them. Some landowners just want a gallon or two of honey, some want a case of quarts, some just want a jar or two. I have one guy, he's a big landowner, we have 8 yards on property owned by him. He doesn't want anything. He just says he likes to see the bees around and he's happy to have them. So we don't get carried away with yard rent. A case or two of honey a year should do it. I've had a friend back in Oregon that just gave everybody a 5-gallon bucket, kept it simple. Most people like it in jars though. So we're slowly moving towards what I call permanent bee stands rather than pallets. As we generate new colonies and cell colonies, we're slowly doing away with the pallets. I'll never be completely done with pallets. There's always some yards that need to be capable of moving for one reason or another, but I really prefer bees on stands like this. Water is important for some people. Here we don't have to worry about it. I don't have a single bee yard that doesn't have water within 100 or 200 yards. We don't even have to worry about it. It's just there. So accessibility in winter. Some of our yards are pretty slick coming in on that red Georgia clay pathway into our yards. We have a couple we actually have to move for the winter because we can't get in there. And we have to consider 50-year flood. It rains a lot here. What looks high and dry one day could suddenly be underwater another day. We try to have some distance between each yard, maybe 1.5 miles or 2 if we can. I actually like them not to be too far apart, not only because it's efficient for travel between yards, but if you have colonies that are superseding or have swarmed and they're trying to mate a queen, it's really good. It's extremely good actually to have other yards within flight distance of your queen. A lot of people don't realize that when a queen leaves the yard to mate, she travels farther, generally, travels farther than in drones from her own yard. I read one research study where they dissected some queens and found that most of the sperm in those queens came from drones that were at least a mile away, and much of it was even further, whereas only 10% of the sperm was from drones that had originated in the same yard as her. So that's something to consider. Let's see. I don't like being around other beekeepers for obvious reasons. You know, if they aren't taking care of their mites or have disease issues or something like that, my bees can go over and rob them out and bring all that junk home. And plus, I like my bees to mate with the type of stock that I'm trying to generate. So sometimes it can't be helped. We've got other beekeepers around us, and sometimes that's just the way it is. We like the trucks to get real close to the yard, of course, when it's time to pull honey. In this yard, the truck can actually pull in the yard. It's not ideal because it's on a hillside and the truck's not level, but at least we don't have to walk too far. And then the question of how many colonies are in a yard. It used to be that all my yards were 64 colonies because that's what one of our smaller trucks held when I was moving bees a lot, and especially when we were going long distances, it would really be dictated by how many bees fit on a truck. Nowadays, I just like to see smaller yards. This yard I'm standing in is, I think it's a 40 or a 42. That's a good size. You know, we can kind of get in and out before robbing goes absolutely stupid crazy when we're pulling honey or something like that. Whereas in a yard of 64, by the time you're out of there, the bees are trying to pick the truck up and fly away with the truck. So I hate robbing, so if I can minimize that, it's helpful. Of course, the ideal yard size for the colonies themselves is 1. The less bees you have in a yard, the better that those bees will do. That's an obvious no-brainer. But for efficiency, for the way we're operating right now, I'm kind of liking the 32 to 40. Many of our yards are still 48, but as we progress into the future, I think I'm going to try to trim them all down to 40. It's just a matter of getting more yards. Even though my colony count is shrinking, I seem to be getting more yards. When we peaked out at 2,800 colonies probably 6 or 8 years ago, and I had a lot of yards, probably 60 or something like that. Right now I've got about 43. Hope to get a couple more today or very soon, and just kind of downsize the size of my yards a little bit. We don't move anymore, so I don't have to have yards that are conducive to truck load sizes. Okay. Well, we're making another bee yard. Sometimes it takes a little tree cutting. The landowner here is happy to get rid of some of these trees. I think he's got a little sawmill down below. He's actually going to cut them up into wood, planks and stuff. So take a few hours, but I consider this a really good spot, so it's worth the labor. It'll be a permanent bee yard and be really nice when we're done.
Hell yeah. That's what we need, Bob, just for the bee yards. You know?
Yeah.
Go ahead and get a trailer. Want me to get in there and get some of those little trees?
No, he says those are persimmons. He wants to save them.
Okay.
See the two thin columns?
I got
And then there's a third one back there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they won't block the sun much.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But we can get in the middle there between the dogwoods and the persimmons and take that little stuff.
Okay.
Just don't cut the dogwoods.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe the gate could be right here. So we're making this yard 32 colonies because of its location. We're really deep in the mountains here. I've got a yard 1.5 miles to the left and a yard 1.5 miles to the right. I've been trying to get a yard in this area for a long time. Finally got somebody that will allow me to do it. Turns out to be a real nice guy. Said, anything we need, anything you want, you just let me know. And it's kind of a picturesque spot. He's got an old-fashioned wood mill down here. He cuts lumber for a living. It's really a neat location. And then just beyond the wood mill down there's a really good-sized creek. And then right behind us that's north. So we got that north windbreak we're always looking for. Beautiful piece of property. The landowner told me that it's been in his family since 1830. There's several families on the property. This is really a typical Appalachian scene right here. There's at least 3, maybe 4 families on this old homestead. A couple houses up there you can't see. And they're all just tickled pink that we're putting bees here. They've all been down here trying to help us cut trees and telling us how to do it too. So it's just been fun. We'll be done with this shortly, and then Seth gets the privilege of moving some singles in here tonight. He's going to do it by himself. They're not very heavy. So tonight this spot will be populated. This is Bear Central. Have to have an electric fence. No electric fence, no bees. It really is as simple as that. So we're getting pretty good at building these fences. We build, at this point, I think I've built hundreds of them. So. Okay, Seth, you can hammer now.
All right.
Yeah, do that all day long.
Oh no, I have one or twice.
Okay. Seth's complaining. He says, why do I always get stuck with the dirty work?
With the rail hammer.
Okay. It's a substantial ground rod going in the earth.
The ground soft. So.
Yeah, ground soft, and it stays moist up in this area, so one ground rod will do it. If we were in a drier location, we'd put several ground rods around the fence, but we're just above kind of a draw here that I think moisture is going to continuously run in this direction. One ground rod will do it. Have at it. Okay, these bee stands are real simple. They're just made out of landscape timbers we purchased at Home Depot. They come in 8-foot sections. We cut them in half, and then we cut them in quarters. So we got a 4-footer on the ground, a 2-footer in the middle, and then a 4-footer on the top, and gets the bees off the ground enough for us. These fences are real simple. They're not very high. You can see that top wire up against Jesse there. My first bear fences were 5 strands high and probably 4.5 feet off the ground. And over the years, over the decades, they've slowly gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. And I just eventually came to the opinion that bears don't jump fences. They try to go through them. So what we got here is a hot wire on the bottom. The middle wire is straight to the ground rod, and then the top wire is hot, so when a bear goes through, he's getting both the hot and the ground at the same time. And that's especially important in really dry weather, so if the soil is dry, the bear may not get grounded really well. But boy, with that ground wire in the middle, it's a force to be reckoned with, huh, John?
Yeah, it's bad.
John and I touched one together once. You remember that, John?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, gosh.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, lit us up, boy.
Oh,
We thought the fence wasn't working too good until we touched the middle ground wire. We just weren't getting a good ground because the soil was dry. So we set up this brand new bee yard. The only thing I think I might want to do is bring in some 1x4s to lift the backs of some of these up. It's important that the rainwater runs out and then not in. Most of them are pointed downhill, so the rainwater will run out. I see maybe 2 or 3 stands that need a 1x4 on the back. And besides that, this is a beautiful spot. Kind of picturesque. I'll sweep around. This is a low elevation yard for us. This is down on the Piedmont. I'm going to take a guess about 1,400 feet. But we need some of those. We need yards like that to start splitting and making nukes a little earlier than the ones that are up in the mountains at a higher elevation. So I think this is going to be a wonderful yard right up against the woods back there. Good job, guys. On to the next yard.